The night was silent except for the sound of the storm outside. Rain struck the metal roof of the small cabin, and the wind howled through the lonely valley. Inside, the human sat alone by the dim fire, staring at the flames as if they were his only companions. He had been living on this colony world for months, away from the noise of cities, away from people, away from everything. Loneliness had become his shadow, his only visitor. Then, a sudden noise broke the quiet. A knock, hard and desperate, echoed against the wooden door. At first he thought it was the wind, but then it came again, louder, more urgent. His chest tightened. No one ever came here. Not at this hour. Not in this storm. Cautiously he stood, his boots pressing against the old floorboards, and he stepped toward the door. Another knock shook the cabin, this time followed by a voice, weak but clear. "Please open, I beg you." The human froze. It was not a man's voice, nor the voice of any human woman. It carried an alien tone, soft but trembling, filled with fear. His hand hovered over the lock, his mind racing. What if it was a trick? What if bandits or raiders were outside, waiting to storm in? But then the knock came again, and this time he heard something else, a faint cry, the sound of children. His heart stirred, fear battled with curiosity. Slowly he pulled the latch, the door creaked open, and the storm's breath rushed inside. There, in the doorway, stood a figure cloaked in soaked fabric, water dripping from every edge. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dark. Not human eyes, but alien, large and filled with sorrow. Beside her clung two small figures, children, their faces pale, their bodies shivering. The human stared, unable to speak, his mind trying to understand. The woman lifted her head, her voice breaking as she whispered, "I am a widow. My children are hungry. We have nowhere to go. Please, let us in." Her words carried both shame and desperation, as if speaking them cost her every ounce of strength. The children pressed closer to her, hiding behind her legs, their small hands clutching her dress. Lightning flashed, and for a brief moment he saw their faces clearly, eyes wide, lips trembling. His heart pounded. He had never been this close to an alien family. They were supposed to keep to their own settlements, and humans to theirs. The rules were clear. The mistrust between both races was deep. Yet here she was, standing on his doorstep, shivering, pleading, and in that moment, she seemed less like an alien and more like any mother in pain. "Why me?" he muttered softly, not sure if he spoke to her or to himself. Her eyes locked onto his, shimmering with tears. "Because you are the only one who will listen," she said, almost a whisper against the storm. Her voice cracked, and then came the words that made his breath catch. "I will warm your bed, human. Just give my children a father. Give them a chance to live." The fire inside the cabin hissed as the wind pushed through the open door. The human stood frozen, his hand gripping the frame, torn between fear and something he had not felt in years, compassion. The children's eyes met his, wide and desperate, and suddenly the silence of his cabin felt heavier than ever before. The night had brought him loneliness countless times, but this night was different. This night had brought a choice, and it knocked at his door with trembling hands and pleading eyes, and the storm waited for his answer. The human hesitated, the cold wind rushing in through the open door as if urging him to decide. The alien woman's shoulders shook from the storm, her clothes soaked, her hair clinging to her face. The two children pressed tightly against her legs, their small bodies trembling from both fear and hunger. For a long moment, he simply stared, unable to move, unable to understand why she had come to him. Finally, with a heavy breath, he stepped aside. "Come in," he said softly, his voice almost lost under the roar of the storm. Her eyes widened with disbelief, then with quiet relief, and she quickly guided her children inside. The door shut with a heavy thud, blocking out the storm, but not the tension that filled the cabin. The woman pulled back her soaked hood, revealing her alien features more clearly under the firelight. Her skin carried a faint shimmer, almost like starlight hidden beneath the surface. Her eyes, though different from human eyes, were filled with exhaustion and sorrow. She lowered her head, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Thank you. I did not know if you would open the door." The children huddled near the fire, their small hands stretched out toward the warmth. He noticed the way their cheeks were sunken, their clothes torn, their eyes heavy from lack of sleep. The human's heart tightened. He had seen hungry people before, but never like this. He poured warm water into a cup and handed it to the woman, who accepted it with shaking hands. Her lips whispered something in her own language, perhaps a prayer, perhaps simple gratitude. "Why are you here?" the human asked at last, his voice steady but cautious. The woman looked at him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "My mate is gone," she said quietly. "Killed in the last border clash. His clan refused to help me. They called me a burden, a shame. They cast me out." She swallowed hard, her voice breaking. "My children have no father, no food, no safety. We wandered until we had nowhere left to go." The human frowned, feeling the weight of her words. There had always been tension between their species, suspicion and mistrust on both sides. Yet now, in his small cabin, those divides seemed far away. All he saw was a mother who had lost everything, and two children who could barely stand from hunger. The woman set down the cup, her trembling fingers clutching the edge of the table. "I have nothing left to offer," she whispered, "except myself." Her voice grew quieter, more fragile, as if she was ashamed of every word she spoke. "I will warm your bed, human, if you let my children stay, if you give them a chance to live. They need a father, and I need someone who will not throw us away." The human froze, the weight of her plea sinking deep into him. He had not touched another soul in years, not since leaving Earth, not since his own heart had broken long ago. Her words echoed inside him, not as temptation, but as desperation. She was not offering love, she was offering survival, her body and her dignity traded for the lives of her children. The children looked up at him then, their eyes wide, filled with silent questions, silent hope. He turned his gaze away, his chest tightening, his thoughts spinning. He had left humanity to escape such burdens, to live in solitude, free of ties, free of responsibility. And yet, here they were, an alien widow and her children, placing that responsibility back in his hands. The fire crackled, the storm howled outside, and the weight of her plea lingered heavy in the cabin air. The human realized his life would never be the same again. One choice could either close the door forever, or open it to something he did not yet understand. Her words were not just a plea, they were a turning point, and as he looked at her, trembling, yet unbroken, he knew he could not ignore it. The cabin felt smaller now, the firelight flickering against the walls as the storm roared outside. The human sat across from the alien widow, watching her carefully, his hands resting on the table but never far from the knife by his side. Her children had curled up on the floor near the fire, already drifting into sleep, their small faces peaceful despite the storm. But peace did not reach him. His mind was restless, filled with doubt, filled with questions he could not answer. He studied her movements, the way her hands shook, the way her eyes avoided his too often. Every instinct told him to be cautious, to keep his guard high. He had heard stories of desperate aliens luring humans into traps, offering kindness only to betray them. What if she was lying? What if behind her sorrow there was something darker? What if her clan was waiting in the trees, ready to storm his cabin once he let his guard down? She seemed to feel his eyes on her, because she finally looked up, her voice soft but steady. "You do not trust me," she said, her alien accent wrapping around the words. He did not deny it. He only leaned back, his eyes narrowing. "I don't know you," he answered. "I don't know what you want from me, or what danger you bring to my door." Her shoulders slumped, as if the weight of his suspicion was heavier than the storm outside. "You are right not to trust," she whispered. "Trust has cost me everything. It cost me my mate. It cost me my clan. It cost me my place among my people." Her voice cracked, but she forced herself to continue. "But I have no trap, no weapon, no plan. Only two children who will not survive another night without shelter." The human clenched his jaw, his thoughts racing. Every word she spoke sounded true, but truth could be faked, and kindness could be twisted into betrayal. He stood and walked toward the window, peering into the dark. Storm, lightning splitting the sky for only a second. He saw nothing beyond the rain, no shadows of warriors waiting, no movement at all, but the storm could hide anything, and suspicion gnawed at him. Behind him, the woman pulled the blanket tighter around her children, her eyes following him carefully. She could sense his mistrust, and though it hurt, she did not argue. Instead, she spoke in a low, steady tone. "If you fear I will harm you, then let us sleep outside your door. We will not complain, we will not fight. At least my children will be near your fire." Her words cut through him more than any knife could. The human turned slowly, staring at her in silence. She had offered herself to him once, now she offered only to suffer, just to keep her children alive. It did not sound like the voice of a deceiver. It sounded like the voice of someone who had lost everything, and yet his heart refused to settle. His mind refused to lower its guard. The fire crackled, the children stirred. One of them murmured softly in their sleep, calling for a father who would never answer. The human's throat tightened, a memory flashing across his mind, his own family, long gone, left behind on earth. He clenched his fists, trying to bury the ache, but it rose with every glance at the widow and her children. Perhaps it was that memory, that old wound, that made him hesitate. Perhaps it was why he had not already thrown them out into the storm. He returned to his seat, his eyes never leaving hers. "You can stay tonight," he said firmly, "but if I find out this is a trick, I will end it." The widow bowed her head, her voice trembling with relief. "You will not regret this," she whispered, though even she did not know if her words would prove true. The storm outside raged on, but inside the cabin a different storm brewed. Suspicion and fear pressed heavily on the human's heart. Night was not yet over, and neither of them knew if trust or betrayal would come with the dawn. The storm outside showed no mercy. The walls of the cabin shook with each burst of wind, and the rain pounded against the roof like drums of war. Inside, the fire struggled to keep its flame alive, its light flickering across the faces of the widow and her children. The human stood for a long time near the door, his hand on the lock, his mind heavy with the choice he had already made. He had let them in, and now he had to live with what that meant. The children lay wrapped in a blanket near the fire, their breathing slow, their small chests rising and falling. Sleep had come quickly to them, pulled by exhaustion and hunger, but their faces carried peace for the first time. The widow knelt close by them, watching with a tenderness that made her look less alien and more like any mother in the galaxy. Her hands stroked their hair gently, and her lips moved in soft whispers, words of comfort in a language the human could not understand. The human dragged a chair closer to the fire and sat, his eyes never leaving her. He noticed her clothes were still wet, her body trembling from the cold. Her skin, faintly glowing beneath the firelight, shimmered as droplets of water slid down her arms. For a moment, he wondered how far she had walked in the storm, how long she had carried her children through such darkness. "You should dry yourself," he said at last, his voice firm, but not unkind. The woman lifted her head, surprised by his words, then nodded slowly. She moved to the fire, stretching her hands toward the flames, her fingers delicate, almost fragile. Silence filled the cabin, broken only by the crackling of wood and the distant thunder. At last, she spoke, her voice low and filled with weariness. "You wonder why I came to you," she said, her eyes staring into the fire. "You think perhaps I had another choice, but I did not." Her words fell heavy between them, and he did not answer. She turned her head then, meeting his eyes with a strength that startled him. "My people see me as weak, as useless without my mate. They would rather my children starve than give us shelter, but I will not let them die. I will beg, I will crawl, I will even knock at a human's door if that is what it takes." The human shifted uneasily in his chair, her honesty cutting sharper than any blade. He wanted to ask her why she had spoken of warming his bed, why she had offered herself in such a way, but the words caught in his throat. She must have read the question in his eyes, because she looked down and whispered, "Do not mistake me, human. I did not speak of love. I spoke of survival. I would trade anything, even my dignity, if it meant my children would live." The confession hit him harder than the storm outside. There was no trick, no hidden plot, only raw desperation. He felt the weight of it pressing on his chest, the truth of a mother with nothing left but her will to protect her children. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, staring into the fire. "You don't need to offer yourself to me," he said quietly. "You and your children can stay, at least until the storm passes." Her lips parted, her eyes wide with surprise. Then slowly her shoulders sank as if a great burden had lifted. "Thank you," she whispered. And for the first time her voice carried more hope than fear. She drew the blanket tighter around her children, pulling them close, her eyes soft with relief. The firelight painted her face with warmth, and though her features were alien, her emotions were clear. The human sat in silence, his thoughts tangled. He had come to this world to escape, to be alone, yet here he was, with an alien widow and 2 children asleep at his fire. The storm roared on, but for the first time in years, his cabin no longer felt empty. Letting them in had changed everything, and he knew this was only the beginning. Morning crept slowly into the valley, the storm easing into a steady drizzle. The cabin smelled of damp wood and faint smoke from the fire that had burned all night. The human woke early, his body stiff from sleeping in the chair, his eyes moving immediately to the small family near the hearth. The widow had stayed awake most of the night, her children clinging to her sides, but now she sat slumped against the wall, her head bowed in exhausted sleep. For a long moment, he watched them in silence, the strangeness of it still heavy in his chest. His cabin had been a place of solitude, untouched by anyone else, but now there were footprints in the mud outside, soft breaths inside, and a weight he could not ignore. His stomach growled, and he remembered theirs must be far worse. Quietly, he rose and began to prepare food. He set a small pot over the fire, adding the last of his grain and a few strips of dried meat. The smell of warmth soon filled the cabin, and the soft bubbling of stew stirred the air. The sound woke the children first, their noses twitching, their eyes blinking open. They sat up, wide-eyed, as if unable to believe such a smell was real. The human ladled the stew into bowls and placed them on the table. The children glanced at their mother, still asleep, then looked back at the food, their hunger stronger than their hesitation. The boy reached first, his small hands clumsy but desperate. The girl followed, and soon both were eating quickly, spoonful after spoonful. The human said nothing, only watched, his chest tight as he saw how thin they were, how their hands shook even as they tried to eat faster. The widow stirred awake at the sound of spoons clinking, her eyes snapping open. She sat up quickly, her voice sharp though weak. "Wait," she whispered, as if afraid they had stolen. But when she saw the human sitting at the table, watching calmly, her shoulders dropped, her expression softening. Her children looked at her with guilty eyes, their mouths full, but she only brushed their hair gently, her face breaking with relief. She moved to the table and sat slowly, her hands trembling as the human pushed a bowl toward her. She stared at it for a long time, her pride warring with her hunger. But then her children's small voices urged her, and she took the spoon. When she tasted it, her eyes closed, and a single tear slid down her cheek. "It has been many days," she whispered, her voice breaking, "since I have eaten with them." The human shifted uncomfortably, not knowing how to answer. He had eaten alone for so long, silence always his companion. But this morning, the sound of spoons scraping, the quiet hum of the widow's voice, the laughter of children between bites. It felt strange. It felt alive. Something inside him stirred, something he had buried long ago. The children finished quickly, leaning back with small smiles, their bellies full for the first time in weeks. The widow ate slowly, as if afraid the food might vanish if she rushed. When she set the empty bowl down, she bowed her head deeply. "Thank you, human," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You have done more for us in one morning than my own people in many moons." He looked at her, unsure what to say. He wanted to brush off her words, to claim it was nothing, but deep down he knew it was not nothing. It was a choice, a step he had taken, and it had changed the air in the cabin. The storm outside was fading, but inside something new had begun, something fragile, something uncertain. For the first time in years, the human did not eat in silence. And as he sat at the table with the alien widow and her children, he realized the first meal was not only for their survival, it was the beginning of something larger, a bond forming, a thread of connection he could not yet name. The day passed quietly, the storm easing into nothing more than dripping water from the cabin roof. The children played softly near the hearth, their laughter faint but genuine, a sound the cabin had never known before. The human worked outside for a while, chopping wood, repairing the fence, but all the while his thoughts returned to the widow and her children. Every swing of his axe reminded him that he was no longer living for himself alone. By evening, the cabin smelled of smoke and stew again, the fire glowing warmly in the dim room. The children had eaten and fallen asleep quickly, their small bodies curled together under a blanket, their faces calm for once. The human sat at the table, silent, while the widow remained by the fire, her glowing eyes fixed on the flames. The silence between them was heavy, but not empty. It was the silence of two people carrying burdens neither dared to speak. At last the widow broke it, her voice soft, almost carried away by the crackle of the fire. "You wonder why I spoke as I did last night," she whispered, her hands folded in her lap. He did not answer, but his jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on her. She turned her head slightly, her gaze meeting his, steady but fragile. "I spoke of warming your bed, of giving myself to you," she continued, "because I thought it was the only way you would open your door." The human's chest tightened, hearing her words laid bare. "I am not proud," she said, her voice trembling now, "but when your children are starving, pride is useless. You sell whatever you have, and I only had myself." Her fingers clenched, her eyes glistening with tears she refused to let fall. He watched her carefully, his suspicion from the night before still alive, but something else now stirred inside him. Understanding. He leaned back slowly, the chair creaking under his weight. "You thought I would take advantage. Hey, Nipsatsi," he said, his tone more statement than question. She lowered her head, nodding faintly. "Men of my clan would have," she whispered, "and I thought humans were no different." Her words stung him more than he expected. He wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, but he could not. He knew too well that many men, human or alien, would have taken her offer without hesitation, and that truth made her desperation all the more real. The fire snapped, sparks dancing upward, and the room seemed smaller. For a long time, they sat in silence, until the human finally spoke. "I don't want your body," he said quietly. "If you stay, it is not for that. It is because of them." His eyes flicked to the children, sleeping soundly, her breath caught, and her lips parted, but no words came. For the first time she seemed unsure how to respond. At last, she whispered, "Then you are different, human, different from the men I have known." Her voice carried both relief and disbelief, as though she feared it was too good to trust. She wrapped the blanket tighter around her children, her glowing eyes dimming as exhaustion pulled at her. Yet before she turned away, she spoke once more. "I do not know your story, but I see sorrow in your eyes, sorrow like mine. Perhaps that is why you let us in." The words struck him deeper than he expected. Old memories stirred, memories he had buried when he left Earth, faces long gone, voices silenced forever. He turned away, staring into the shadows of the cabin, unwilling to let her see the truth in his eyes. But her words lingered, wrapping around him like the storm had the night before. The cabin grew quiet again, the children's breath steady, the fire burning low. The human lay back in his chair, but sleep did not come easily. Her whispers haunted him, stirring feelings he had long kept locked away. Outside, the world was silent, but inside, something was beginning to change. Something fragile, something dangerous, something he could not yet name. The morning came gray and cold, mist clinging to the valley like a blanket of ghosts. The human rose early, his eyes heavy from a night without rest, his mind spinning with the widow's whispers. He moved through his small cabin in silence, feeding the fire, boiling water, trying to push the weight of his thoughts away. But every glance at the sleeping children, every faint sigh from the widow, reminded him that his life was no longer his own. He stepped outside, the air sharp and damp, the ground still soft from the storm. The world smelled of wet earth and pine, but instead of peace, it carried unease. His hands gripped the wooden fence as he stared across the valley, his heart beating hard in his chest. He had survived by living alone, by avoiding ties, but now those ties were inside his cabin, and they were pulling him into something he could not escape. Behind him, the door creaked, and the widow stepped out quietly, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her glowing eyes softened when they met his, though caution lingered in her gaze. "You did not sleep," she said gently, her voice still carrying the rhythm of her alien tongue. He shook his head, his jaw tightening. "No," he muttered. "I kept asking myself if I made a mistake letting you in." Her shoulders sank, the blanket slipping slightly, but she did not look away. "You wonder if I am a danger," she said softly, "if I bring trouble to your door." He turned toward her, his face stern, his eyes searching hers. "I wonder if I can protect you," he admitted. "I wonder if I can protect myself if your people come looking." The words hung in the morning air like smoke. The widow lowered her eyes, her voice trembling. "My clan will not forgive me for leaving," she whispered. "If they learn I came to a human, they will see it as betrayal. They will call me unclean, and they will try to take my children away." She raised her head then, her gaze sharp with both fear and fire. "But I will not let them. I would rather die than see them dragged back." The human's chest tightened, her desperation like a blade cutting through his doubts. He wanted to believe her, to trust her, but trust had always been a dangerous thing. His life had been built on walls to keep out pain, loss, and betrayal. And now here she was, tearing those walls apart with every word. He stepped closer, his voice low, steady, but carrying the storm within him. "If I let you stay, there is no turning back," he said. "Your enemies will become mine, and I do not know if I am ready for that." The widow took a shaky breath, her hand clutching the blanket at her chest. "Then send us away," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Send us into the valley, into the hunger, into the cold. At least we will die quickly." Her words struck him like a hammer. He saw the children's faces flash in his mind, their small hands clutching spoons, their laughter soft as they played near his fire. He closed his eyes, his fists tightening at his sides. He could not send them away, not after hearing their laughter, not after seeing the widow's tears. When he opened his eyes again, there was steel in them, a decision forged in fire. "You stay," he said firmly. "Whatever comes, you stay here." The widow's lips parted, her eyes wide with disbelief, then filled with tears she could not hold back. She bowed her head deeply, her voice breaking. "You have given us life, human, and I will not forget it." The human turned back to the valley, his jaw set, his heart heavy but steady. He knew this choice would bring danger. He knew it would tear apart the quiet life he had built. But for the first time in years, he no longer cared for silence. He cared for the warmth inside his cabin, for the voices that filled it, for the lives now bound to his own. And though doubt lingered, the decision was made, unshakable as the mountains around them. The days that followed were strangely calm. The widow tended to her children, washing their clothes, teaching them soft songs of her people. The children laughed more now, their thin faces slowly filling with life as they ate warm food each night. The human worked harder than ever, chopping wood, hunting game, making sure the cabin stayed stocked. Yet every swing of his axe, every step into the forest, carried the weight of unease. He felt it before he saw it. Shadows in the tree line that vanished when he turned, broken branches that hadn't been there the day before. The forest was alive with signs of someone watching, someone waiting. The hair on his neck stood tall, and his hand never strayed far from the knife on his belt. One morning, as mist curled low in the valley, he found fresh tracks near the stream, large, heavy boots, not his own, and not from traders either. He crouched low, his fingers brushing the marks in the mud. They led toward the ridge, toward the direction of the alien settlements. His jaw tightened, his heart heavy. The storm he feared was coming. When he returned to the cabin, the widow sensed it instantly. She looked at him, her glowing eyes sharp, her voice low so the children would not hear. "They are here, aren't they?" she whispered, her hands trembling as she clutched her shawl. He nodded once, his silence confirming her fears. Her lips pressed tight, and for a moment she seemed unable to breathe. "They will come for me," she said, her voice breaking. "They will take my children. They will call them clan property, not mine." She shook her head fiercely, her eyes burning. "I will fight them with my hands if I must. I will die before I let them take my children again." Her words struck him like fire, and he felt something rise in his chest, something sharp and unyielding. He placed a hand on the wooden table, steady and strong. "They will not touch them while they are under my roof," he said firmly. That night, the tension was thick. The fire burned low, the children slept peacefully, but the adults did not. The widow sat close to her little ones, her hand resting on their hair, her eyes never leaving the door. The human sat by the window, his rifle across his knees, staring into the night, waiting, listening. Every rustle of the trees outside, every whisper of the wind made his grip tighten. Then it came, a faint sound, almost drowned by the wind. Voices, harsh and guttural, speaking in the alien tongue. He saw figures moving at the edge of the forest, carrying torches that flickered like angry stars. The widow stiffened, her breath catching, as if the sound alone had stabbed her heart. "They found us," she whispered, pulling the children closer. The human's face hardened, his eyes narrowing as he watched the shadows grow nearer. This was no longer suspicion, no longer fear. It was truth standing outside his cabin. He rose slowly, steady as stone, his rifle gripped tight. The widow looked at him, her eyes wide, pleading but also trusting. For the first time, she was not alone. For the first time, someone stood between her and the clan that had cast her away. The children stirred in their sleep, unaware of the storm outside the walls. The widow whispered something in her tongue, a prayer or perhaps a warning, and the human stepped to the door, his voice low but unshakable. "If they want you, they'll have to go through me first." Outside, the torches flared brighter, the voices grew louder. The night no longer belonged to the storm. It belonged to the threat that had come at last. And in that moment, the cabin was no longer a place of hiding. It was a place of defiance, of danger, of choices that could not be undone. The night outside burned with the light of torches. Figures moved closer through the mist, their shadows long, their voices sharp and angry. The human stood at the door, rifle in hand, his heart steady, though his blood pounded in his ears. Behind him, the widow clutched her children tightly, whispering to them in her own tongue, trying to quiet their fear. A heavy fist slammed against the wooden door, rattling the cabin walls. "Open!" a voice thundered in the alien language, deep and commanding. The widow's face turned pale, her eyes glowing faintly in the firelight. "It is the clan leader," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He has come for us." The human did not move to open the door. Instead, he called out, his voice firm. "You have no claim here. This is my home, and those inside are under my protection." The words rang through the night, sharp and unshaken. Silence followed for a moment, broken only by the hiss of the fire and the children's muffled sobs. Then laughter erupted outside, cruel and mocking. "You dare speak of protection, human," the leader's voice sneered. "You dare claim what belongs to the clan." The torches flared brighter, shadows shifting as more figures stepped forward. Through the window, the human counted at least 6 of them, armed with blades and spears, their eyes glowing like coals in the dark. The widow's hands tightened on the blanket around her children. "They will not leave without us," she whispered. "They believe my children belong to them, as property, not family." Her eyes turned to the human, shimmering with both terror and trust. "You should not fight them. They will kill you." But he only shook his head, his jaw like iron. "Then they will learn tonight what it means to face a human who does not run." He stepped forward, unlatching the door with a sharp motion, and swung it open. The cold night air rushed in, carrying the smell of smoke and wet earth. The alien leader stood tall in the torchlight, his armor gleaming with rain, his eyes glowing red in the mist. Around him, warriors held their spears high, their teeth bared in contempt. He looked at the human with open scorn, his voice a growl. "Step aside, man of earth. This female is ours. Her children are ours. Her life is ours. You have no right." The human raised his rifle, the barrel gleaming in the firelight. "I have every right inside my home," he said coldly, "and I will die before I hand them to you." The clan leader sneered, his laughter booming through the valley. "You think one weapon will stop us? You are a fool, human." But the human did not lower his rifle. His eyes burned with a fury the widow had never seen before. He had lived in silence for years, avoiding war, avoiding pain. But now something stronger than fear rose in him. It was not just anger, it was purpose. He took a single step forward, his voice cutting through the night like steel. "Try me," he said, the word low but filled with fire. The warriors shifted uneasily, their spears wavering as they met his gaze. There was something in the human stance, something unyielding, something that even hardened fighters could not ignore. The widow watched from behind, her heart pounding. She had expected fear, hesitation, but what she saw instead was defiance carved into flesh and bone. Her children clung to her, but for the first time their eyes turned to the human with hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, he could stand against the storm. The standoff stretched long into the night, the torches crackling, the mist swirling. Neither side moved, neither side yielded. But one truth had been made clear: the human would not give them up, not without a fight. And the clan knew then that taking the widow and her children would not be simple. The torches faded into the mist before dawn. The clan had left with threats, but not with the widow or her children. The human stood in the doorway until the last shadow was gone, his rifle still tight in his grip. Only when silence returned to the valley did he close the door, locking it firmly behind him. Inside, the widow sat near the fire, her children pressed close to her side. Their eyes were wide, still filled with fear, but also something new. Safety. When the human turned toward them, the widow rose slowly, her body trembling from more than the cold. "You stood against them," she whispered, her voice thick with disbelief. "You faced my clan when even I could not." The human said nothing at first, setting the rifle aside, his hands heavy with the weight of choice, but her eyes followed him, glowing softly in the dim light, searching for words he would not speak. At last he muttered, "They had no right. No one has the right to take children from their mother." The widow bowed her head, her lips trembling. "You speak as though you are one of us," she said softly, "but you are not. You are human, and still you protect us." The children stirred, the boy stepping forward timidly, his small hand reaching for the human's. For a moment the man froze, unused to such touch, unused to such trust. Then slowly, he let the boy's hand curl around his fingers. The girl soon followed, clutching his sleeve, her eyes wide but shining with gratitude. The widow watched, her breath catching, as if a thread she thought was broken had been tied again. Days passed, and the bond between them grew like a hidden flame. The human taught the children small tasks, how to stack firewood, how to mend tools, how to listen for danger in the forest. The children followed him eagerly, their laughter filling the cabin, chasing away the silence that had haunted it for years. The widow watched, her heart torn between relief and awe. Every time her children smiled, she whispered thanks under her breath. One evening, after the children had fallen asleep, the widow approached the table where the human sat sharpening his knife. "You have given them more than food," she said gently, her voice steady, though her eyes glistened. "You have given them a father's hand, even if you do not wish to claim it." The human paused, his jaw tightening, the blade catching the firelight. "I did not ask for that," he muttered, his voice rough. "I am no father." But the widow stepped closer, her hand resting lightly on the table. "You are more father to them in these few days than their clan has ever been," she whispered. "They already look to you. They already trust you." Her words stirred something deep inside him, something he had long buried, memories of faces, voices from Earth, the weight of a family he had lost. He looked away, his throat tight, his hands clenching around the knife. The widow studied him for a long moment, then spoke again, softer this time. "I know you carry pain, human. I see it in your eyes, the same pain that burns in mine, loss, grief, the kind that never leaves." Her words cut through his silence like a blade through wood. For the first time he felt seen, not as a stranger, not as an outsider, but as someone broken who had found another broken soul. He met her gaze then, her glowing eyes shimmering in the firelight, not with fear, not with desperation, but with something gentler, gratitude, trust, and perhaps the beginning of something more. The human exhaled slowly, setting the knife aside. "You and the children stay," he said quietly. "No matter what comes, you stay." The widow's lips trembled into the smallest of smiles, her head bowing low, her voice breaking with relief. "Then we are not alone anymore," she whispered. The fire burned low, but warmth filled the cabin that no storm could ever take, and though danger still lurked in the valley, the bond between them had grown roots that even fear could not easily tear apart. The valley lay quiet beneath a silver dawn. Mist rolled over the hills like waves, soft and calm, as though the land itself had taken a long breath. The human stepped outside the cabin, the cool air brushing his face, his rifle slung across his shoulder. For the first time in years, he did not feel the weight of loneliness pressing on his chest. Instead, he felt the warmth of voices inside, voices that waited for him to return. When he came back in, the children ran to him, their faces bright with laughter. The boy held up a piece of wood he had been carving clumsily. The girl clutched a small bundle of wildflowers she had gathered. They both spoke at once, their words spilling like a rushing stream, eager to share their small victories. The human knelt, his rough hands steadying theirs, his lips twitching into something he had not felt in years, a smile. The widow watched from the hearth, her glowing eyes soft. She had shed the shadows that clung to her when she first arrived. Though sorrow still lived in her heart, strength had grown beside it. Every time she looked at her children laughing, eating, or sleeping peacefully, her heart whispered thanks. And every time she looked at the human, her chest filled with something heavier, something she had not dared to hope for. That evening, they shared another meal, simple but warm. The firelight painted the cabin in shades of gold, the children whispering stories to each other until their eyes grew heavy, when they finally drifted into sleep. The widow sat in silence for a long time, her gaze lingering on the man across the table. He sharpened his knife in slow, steady strokes, pretending not to notice her, though he felt the weight of her eyes on him. At last, she spoke, her voice quiet, almost fragile. "You saved us," she whispered. "You gave my children more than safety. You gave them a father's strength, a father's hand." Her words sank into him like stones into water, sending ripples through his silence. He looked at her, his jaw tight, his eyes shadowed. "I only did what was right," he muttered, though even he knew it was more than that. The widow rose, moving closer, the firelight glimmering on her skin. She stood before him, her hands trembling, but her eyes steady. When I knocked at your door, I offered myself in shame, thinking it was the only way to save them, she said, her voice breaking. But you gave us shelter without taking what I feared. You gave us dignity. You gave us life. Her lips trembled, and then she whispered the words again, the same ones she had spoken that first desperate night. I will warm your bed, human. But this time, her voice carried no bargain, no desperation, only honesty, only hope. The human's chest tightened, his eyes locking with hers. He saw no trick, no deceit, only a mother who had found strength again, and a woman who no longer begged for survival but offered trust. Slowly, he set the knife aside, his rough hands curling into fists before opening again. You don't need to offer, he said softly, his voice almost a whisper. You're already part of this home. The widow's eyes filled with tears, but her smile glowed brighter than the fire. She lowered her head, her voice trembling. Then this is no longer just your cabin. It is ours. It is a place of family. The children stirred in their sleep, murmuring softly, their small hands reaching out as if they already knew. The human glanced at them, his heart aching and whole all at once. The storm had come and gone, the threats had not vanished, but something stronger had been born within those wooden walls, a bond forged in fear, in fire, in choices that could not be undone. The human had opened his door to desperation and found instead a family, and the widow, once broken, once cast aside, had found in a human not only protection, but the beginning of love. That night, as the fire dimmed and silence filled the cabin, there was no loneliness left, only warmth, only voices that would rise again with the dawn, and in the heart of the valley, hidden from the world, a new beginning had quietly taken root.